This is an enemy which steals from us the weapons of the 20th century and supplements them with the weapons of the 16th century.
Walk from their bases.
Since humans began to form society and eventually fight wars, everyone knows that an army with greater numbers and superior technology will crush the ones that don't. So how do the smaller ones even win? One very simple answer: don't fight on the biggest one's turn. One way of fighting like that is using guerrilla tactics. It's dirty, it's brutal, and it still works. But let's cut through the crap. 2025 and in the near future, can forces with only simple weapons still defeat a modern army, or has technology made insurgency obsolete? Well, it depends. Not every army is the US with billion-dollar satellites. Not every guerrilla is competent enough to coordinate perfect ambushes. And today we're breaking down real example where guerrilla failed and where it succeeded.
With Chinese versions of the AK-47 and a mix of Soviet and Chinese machine guns, Viet Cong's most impactful weapons against American soldiers were not
While there's no particular way in which a guerrilla forces conduct attacks and ambushes, there are some common things between all of them. So forget theory, here's what guerrillas actually do to survive and inflict as many casualties on the enemy as possible. Spanish, guerrilla means little war, which literally describes the characteristic of guerrilla warfare. Small-scale engagements which doesn't require heavy weapons, meant to inflict annoyance and casualties to the enemy. This means, however, that guerrilla warfare and forces should not engage in any direct confrontation, which requires heavy support like tanks and artillery, unless they're crazy. And to reduce the number of face-to-face battles like that, not being spotted by the enemy is highly important. Most famous examples of concealments like that was of the Vietnamese during their efforts to drive the Americans out of the country. They had tens of thousands of miles of tunnel, which is also known as Gucci Tunnel. Soldiers used these underground routes to house troops, transport communication and supplies, lay booby traps, and mount surprise attack on US soldiers, after which they could disappear underground to safety. Another example is that of Palestine. Hamas fighters also used such tactic by creating tunnels under the city. They were able to perform hit-and-runs attack on Israeli soldiers, retreat when needed, which proved to be too costly for the IDF in both manpower and equipment.
American
It's
killed
very
in
common for a
combat during
guerrilla force
Operation
to be
Restore
very
Hope.
familiar with the
The
local
U.S.
terrains,
military
and
said the
sometimes it
casualties
is
will not
deadly for
lead
the
to any
invaders
changes
that
in
have
the
no idea
operation.
what they're about
Troops
to
will
get
continue
into.
stepping.
An example of knowing your place like that is done during the Battle of Mogadishu 1993. The Somali militia knows every possible route and the Americans don't, and they're very organized. With those advantages in mind, the militia used them smartly. The extraction convoy was effectively stalled by the militia blocking the main roads with rubbish and burning towers, after which they organized coordinated ambush from every corners that the American never expected, causing casualties and thus preventing any relief attempt to be done to save the American troops stranded behind. Blackout Down wasn't a battle, it was a 15 hours ambush. All the Americans had night visions, helicopters, and advanced equipment. The militias knew their own place and turned it into a death trap for the Americans. Insurgents and guerrilla forces don't appear out of nowhere. They're formed in times of crisis. They're formed to fight the occupiers in order to bring order and independence for their own countrymen again. This means that the guerrilla fighting force is a force created by the people, nurtured by the peoples, and supported by the people. Iraq, for examples, after the fall of Saddam Hussein, movement to fight against the occupying forces didn't start immediately, as they hoped for a better life under the US control. Many Iraqis who initially welcomed Saddam's fall turned against the US due to deteriorating security situation, economic collapse, and widespread human rights abuse. This happened every day. US soldiers kicked down doors and barged in, took any military-aged male, and sometimes entire families were murdered. In the script, This was the final straw, as American soldiers fell victim to IED ambush, sniper attack, and many other attempts to inflict as many American casualties as possible.
Vietnam of the Douglas AC-47, spooky gunship in action.
Aside from some iconic victories, guerrillas sometimes lose, as they were either outsmarted or straight up can't handle the pressure from firepower. Here's how armies crush them.
The United States is watching with mounting and
blacked out the whole area for 7 hours, including the vital Shabani asbestos mine, and most effectively ambushed a convoy of 3 police land.
The Rhodesian security forces employed a mix of conventional tactics and innovative counterinsurgency strategies to combat the guerrillas. Rhodesia lacked a large troops number, so it relied on 5-force, a rapid response tactic using helicopters to insert troops near guerrilla positions. This will be executed with spotter aircraft locating insurgents, then troops would fast roll from helicopters to encircle and destroy guerrillas. Additionally, bombers and jets could provide close air support. Force was the devastating tactics. 80% of insurgents' casualties were inflicted this way. Force is essentially an economic of force tactic. There are better tactics for counterinsurgency than 5-force. The reason 5-force was employed in Rhodesia is because Rhodesia was under sanction and couldn't properly equip the units. A popular tactic is called the Citadel Scouts, which use turned guerrillas capture insurgents who cooperate to infiltrate rebel groups. Scouts often disguise themselves as guerrilla to gather intelligence, they let fake supply convoys to ambush real insurgents, and sometimes conduct false flag attacks to turn locals against Zanlo or Zebra. While being extremely successful in disrupting insurgents' network, it is also very controversial due to alleged war crimes, which include the murder of innocent civilians and also race. Tactical successes, Rhodesia could not sustain the war due to economic collapse from sanction and also restraint of political support from other nations. That is why politics always beat tactics. The Afghan Mujahideen and later the Taliban successfully resisted and ultimately forced the withdrawal of the world's most powerful military through a mix of guerrilla warfare, political resilience, and exploits of US strategic failure. The Taliban didn't defeat the US in a military way, they outlasted them. So, are guerrillas still effective? Yes, but not everywhere, not every time. If your enemy is willing to kill everyone, you lose. But if they're weak, corrupt, or just tired, you win. Remember, the best guerrilla tactic isn't a gun. It's knowing your enemy thinks that they're invincible.